Coming up on Network Africa. African Union says it's disturbed by reports of racism and Africans stopped from escaping Ukraine. Burkina Faso military leader approves 3-year transition plan. Plus, nine African migrants drown off Tunisia's coast. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. The African Union says it's disturbed by reports of Africans in Ukraine being refused the right to cross the border to safety. The body urges all countries to respect international law and offer assistance to everyone fleeing from the war, irrespective of their race. The union held member countries and their embassies in countries neighboring Ukraine who are supporting those fleeing from the war. Africans, mostly students, have accused Ukrainian security forces of stopping them from boarding trains headed to the border regions. Videos shared on social media also show Ukrainian border forces pushing citizens as they attempt to leave Ukraine. Thousands of African students are currently stranded amid the ongoing conflict, despite some crossing over to neighboring countries such as Poland and Romania. Professor Chris Isike, president of the African Association of Political Science, joins us now on the program to discuss more on this. Professor Isike, thank you so much for joining us on Network Africa. Yeah, right. Professor Isike, if you can hear me, what do you make of these reports of the treatment of Africans at the border with Ukraine?
Let me know, but in my view, it is a product of the racist international system that is built on a racist ontology of beings versus non-beings.
Well, it seems we're having some audio issues. We will try and sort that out. In the meantime, the Nigerian federal government is given the assurance to begin evacuating Nigerian students stranded in Ukraine on Wednesday, March the 2nd. This is according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, who was speaking during a meeting with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mr. Femi Gbajabiamila. He says the evacuation follows the approval of the president.
We had to also see with Mr. President very quickly. Last week I went, saw him with the Chief of Staff, and he approved that we should go ahead with an airlift. And so we negotiated with their piece. So we have tentatively fixed for Wednesday. The idea is Romania is going to be the hub, and there are about 1,000 already that we're estimating to pick up from Romania. And then you have Slovakia, about 200, Poland, also about 250, and Hungary, the same figure. There are about 150 going into wanting to go through Russia that we have asked students, our ambassadors, to try and get transit permits for. Some of them don't want to come back to the country, but the point is also that we've given a commitment to these transit countries that have given us timelines for the refugees to stay in their countries, you know, and so we also have an obligation to ensure that within that timeline that they come back.
In the meantime, Nigerians still stuck in Ukraine continue to speak of their ordeal. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is on its 6th day, and so far talks for a ceasefire have failed. Earlier today, Freedom Square in central Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, was hit by a Russian strike, causing a huge explosion. For some Nigerian students, nothing is more of a priority than leaving Ukraine, as they share their experiences on how things are panning out.
I haven't experienced so much, but the little I have, so last week, Friday, we decided to go to the border, and the taxi we ordered could not go far because taxis are needed all over Lviv at the moment. So the taxi dropped us almost 25 kilometers from the border, and we started walking. And as we got to the border, the soldiers there were like, okay, we could not go on foot. And because we heard that, okay, people were able to go on foot through the border, but the soldiers said we could not go on foot, that we have to use a vehicle. And at that moment, we could not order any vehicle because it's not as if we didn't have internet, but vehicles could not reach that particular location. So unfortunately for us, there was a bus that was free, and we are almost 40 of us from the school from Lviv. For my school that came together, okay, let's move together as one. But the bus came and the soldiers were like, okay, only women and children. And so what was going to happen to the men? And they were like, we should wait. And it got to a point that we had someone that was speaking, and it's like the soldiers didn't care. They were just, okay, women and children. And I understand that fact, but it was what should we do? That we came here because we were told that we could make it through, but he didn't give so much thought. So he said women and children, and the women, all of them, they entered, the students entered, and they were going, but they said they didn't allow them to go through. I don't know, maybe they said they didn't have the tourist visa, so all had to come back to the border, and it was stressful because it was a whole day's thing, and we could not get taxis early.
We get a lot of messages, a lot of people that sends us, or if you are from Poland border, this is how you go. If you are from Romanian border, if you are from Hungarian border. But the problem for us is we are not in any of these spaces. It's really too much information that are not helpful to us right now. It's really getting us very agitated. Because right now in Sumi, the situation is you can't travel. It's so bad. People try, they get taxis, they get buses, they are trying to find ways, but you can't leave Sumi. First of all, the official transport systems are not working. You can't use trains to leave the city. You can't use buses to leave the city. And okay, so people try to use private cars, but they were sent back. Some of them were sent back. Some of them, they got to this place where the bridge was destroyed. There was this bridge connecting a major intersection within Sumi. So you can't travel, you can't leave. So basically, our voices, our agitation is the fact that we can't leave. We need to be able to leave Sumi. And it's been so difficult. All trains to Sumi are closed. You can't. I heard information from what they told us, they were saying something like the Russians have control of the train tracks and the rail station, so we can't travel. And with the roads, as I said earlier on, some of the roads are destroyed. I mean, bridges connecting Sumi to outlets outside. There's a nearest city to Sumi called Poltava. Some people tried to go to those places, but on their way, they had to come back because the roads have been destroyed.
Here we have Professor Chris Isike, now the president of the African Association of Political Science. Professor Isike, you heard there some Nigerians speaking of their ordeal. What do you make of these reports of the treatment of Africans at the Polish border in Ukraine?
Well, good evening again. I hope you hear me this time. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. No, I was saying that I'm not surprised But I mean, this is a product of the racist international system. I was saying, built on a racist ontology of beings versus non-beings, with Western Europeans and more recently their Eastern European brothers and sisters being the ones that are said to be the beings deserving of human rights and privileges that came with the Enlightenment age. On the other hand, non-Westerners, Africans especially, Arabs, Asians, Caribbean peoples, Latin Americans, and even the Eastern Europeans at some point in their history were regarded as non-beings and zoned into nations and peoples whose sovereignty is denigrated, whose humanity and existence are questioned practically, and by denying them the full enjoyment of rights and privileges. So it is how I see and understand why these Polish migration officers are openly discriminatory against African students like the ones who we just mentioned. I saw yesterday the stories of these officials of an African female student, who was also trying to leave, and responded to calls for females first announcements by these officials, and they just said ignored her and ignored the next African person online and started announcing females first to the Ukrainian woman, female, behind them. So this is a small point that that illustrates the structural inequality of the present so-called international system, as we have seen.
Yeah, and the stories coming out are quite tragic, and you've spoken about the role and the failure of international systems in this crisis. But moving forward, what lessons do you think are here to be learned?
Yeah, clearly the international system has failed to deter, prevent this crisis. Russia is a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. And it has used its veto powers, to veto every UNSC resolution that condemns it, and it will not to use this to its advantage. But for me, there is a silver lining in this war, because it presents an opportunity to reimagine and reconstruct the international system to make it, truly international. If it does survive, this particular war. Either way, what is clear is that the world is not going to go back to a bipolar world or remain multipolar as it is currently. What will more likely happen is a multipolar system, as I've said somewhere, composed of different currencies of major, middle, and regional powers that are blended with an assortment of hard and soft power. So although the current Ukraine and Russia war presents an opportunity for realist interpretations and explanations of, explaining world politics, the world has and will continue to move towards an intersocial and interconnected world over a previously interstate and realist world. So I think that if we are able to understand these shifts, a new world defined by the socialization of relations between states, then we should be able to use this opportunity to reimagine and reform the international system, starting with the United Nations.
And let's bring it home, just finally and very quickly. How do you think African leaders should be responding to this conflict? Many of them have condemned Russia, but what more should they be doing?
Well, they are helpless. They really can't do more than either condemn or stay neutral, as the case may be. Some of them who have condemned are already regretting their condemnation and are trying to find ways to mend their relations with Russia. And it speaks to the broken international system that I was talking about. I think what needs to happen is for African leaders to, come together and push for a more equitable international system. For me, this problem is more systemic than national for particular countries. So they should unify and push for permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council. I know that countries like Nigeria could possibly benefit from this because the price of oil will go up, and Nigeria tends to generally benefit like every oil producing state. But besides that, I think that this is the time for the continent and its leaders to come together and really make serious push, unified push towards getting a seat too in the UN Security Council.
All right, then, Professor Chris Isike, President of the African Association of Political Science, thank you so much for your thoughts on Network Africa.
Thank you, Tani.
When we return in just a moment, we'll have more on the conflict in Ukraine, plus UN chief pleads for immediate climate mitigation and adaptation. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Ghana has become the first African country to evacuate its citizens fleeing the conflict in Ukraine following Russia's invasion. The first group of 17 students arrived this morning in the capital, Accra. Ghana's Foreign Ministry had earlier said some 460 students were on their way to neighboring countries. They are expected to return home in the coming days. The total number of Ghanaians living in Ukraine is unknown, and the government is currently meeting parents and guardians to document all students in the country. It's estimated that more than 1,000 Ghanaian citizens are currently studying or working in Ukraine. And away from the conflict in Ukraine, Ethiopia is planning to repatriate 100,000 citizens held in detention centers in Saudi Arabia. Many of them allegedly entered the country illegally and lack the necessary documents to work there. Ethiopia's government had formed a committee to look into the cases of the migrants. The committee has discussed with stakeholders on how to handle the matter. The ministry's official, Burkina Faso, says those repatriated would also be rehabilitated. Burkina Faso's new military ruler has approved a transitional charter which will allow him to stay in power for 3 years. Paul-Henri Damiba signed a charter which was drawn up by a military-appointed commission and had been discussed by a national forum. The document says he will not be allowed to stand in elections scheduled for 2025. An opposition leader, Eddie Komboigo, says not everyone would be happy with the plan, but it's based on consensus. The previous leader, Roch Kabore, has remained under house arrest since he was toppled in January. Burkina Faso has been suspended from the regional group ECOWAS and the African Union. Some sad news. 9 African migrants have drowned off Tunisia's coast after their boat sank. Tunisia's defense ministry says 9 others were rescued by the Navy and the Coast Guards. The migrants are believed to have been on their way to Italy. People have drowned off the Tunisian coast in the past, while others have made it across to Europe. According to the Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights, Tunisian Coast Guards intercepted last year about 20,000 migrants who were trying to go to Europe from Tunisia or neighboring Libya. Climate change is upon us and humanity is far from ready, as according to the United Nations Climate Panel major report, noting that nearly half the world's population was already vulnerable to increasingly dangerous climate impacts. The report calls for drastic action on a huge scale. Reacting to the report, UN Chief Antonio Guterres says adaptation saves lives while pleading for immediate action.
Nearly half of humanity is living in the danger zone now. Many ecosystems are at the point of no return now. Unchecked carbon pollution is forcing the world's most vulnerable on a frog march to destruction now. The facts are undeniable. This abdication of leadership is criminal. Investments in adaptation work. Adaptation saves lives. As climate impacts worsen, and they will, scaling up investments will be essential for survival. Adaptation and mitigation must be pursued with equal force and urgency. The Glasgow commitment on adaptation funding is not enough to meet the challenges faced by nations on the front lines of the climate crisis. I'm also pressing to remove the obstacles that prevent small island states and least developed countries from getting the finance they desperately need to save lives and livelihoods. We need new eligibility systems to deal with this new reality. Delay means death.
In Uganda, at a lakeside fishing village, 17-year-old Margaret and others like her who became pregnant during Uganda's COVID-19 lockdown are benefiting from a recent government decision to allow girls back into the classroom after they give birth. But the policy is being met with some resistance.
At a wooden shack in a tumble-down row in a fishing village on the shores of Lake Victoria in Uganda, 17-year-old Margaret Babiye, attired in a green and yellow uniform, cuddles her baby at lunch break before she dashes back to school. The young mother and thousands of other girls like her are benefiting from a new policy by the Ugandan government that allows girls who have been given birth to return to class. Part of a broader trend of African nations slowly enacting policies to encourage young mothers back into the classrooms.
I know I made a mistake, giving birth while still young, but I decided to continue with my studies, hoping that one day God will help me make a better future for me so I can be able to take care of my child.
A young fisherman, she said, sobbing as she narrated, lured her into a love affair after the government shut down schools in March 2020 as part of sweeping measures taken to curb the COVID-19 pandemic.
We were not studying. I was idle, and I think I was rebellious. I was not listening to my parents. I felt bad after getting pregnant. I was feeling shame. I couldn't move around in the neighborhood because of the shame and stigma.
According to government data, pregnancy cases among girls aged 10 to 24 increased by 22.5% between March 2020 to June 2020. Schools are mandated to readmit pregnant girls after they have given birth, and parents can report school heads who decline readmission for sanctions.
When the church introduced schools, we have a purpose why we introduced schools. We want to give people knowledge, but at the same time we are also promoting morals and also the fear of God. So there is evangelism, there is morality, and then there is also acquiring education.
Sibagala say they were opposed to pregnant girls and young mothers being in class because their spirituality is messed up, their relationship with God broken, and that they would give a bad example to others.
When you took over morality, these children learn by seeing. You see, whatever they see is what they learn. If a teacher misbehaves, they think that is the way to go. If such girls come in school, then they say, hey, so even when you become pregnant, you can also come and back. So the issue of morality follows out.
Cyrus Kambugu, however, believes the policy is an opportunity to give the mothers a second chance.
Some people would see it strange to have some mothers in classes, but I personally, I accepted it willingly, accepted it, because we need to be considerate, because the lockdown of schools, of course, affected our students, especially girls. So, based on the circumstances that prevailed during that lockdown, I think there was need to give them a second chance.
In a September 2021 report, New York-based rights group Human Rights Watch hailed Uganda as one of at least 5 sub-Saharan African countries that had since 2019 instituted policy initiatives protecting the educational rights of pregnant schoolgirls and adolescent mothers.
And finally on the programme, Algerian Brahim Swissi has been making miniature models of pirate ships and ancient boats for the past decade, wishing he could have sold them. His goal is to make the boats look like the real ones that can sail in the sea one day. Take a look.
It takes an Algerian artist, Brahim Swissi, almost a year to finish a miniature model of a ship, a talent he picked up in 2009. The first model he built was a Black Pearl, a ship from the film franchise Pirates of the Caribbean, and then he followed with several designs that he says pay homage to his country's naval fleet.
I started making them in 2009. This is the Black Pearl boat filmed in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Then I started to develop. I saw a certain model that I liked, so I work on it. I like to make models from history or famous movies. I like to challenge myself.
But his biggest dream is to manufacture a real ship that can sail in the sea one day.
I like sailing boats. They are a challenge for me. They are difficult to make because they need precision and meticulous work. All details should be handmade. My goal is to make them look like the real ones because this is our heritage.
His intricate work is on display at his workshop in the Algerian town of Daliz in the city of Boumerdis. He hopes the government supports his dreams.
If I'm offered government support with a plot of land, I can make boats that sail because I now make miniature models of real ones. If you want to make a real ship, you make a miniature model of it first. If the miniature model does not work, the real one won't.
Most of Swissi's collection will be bought by the Marine Museum of Algiers and the Army Museum. His works are sold to individuals and art lovers as well.
And that's the programme today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyola Shobowale.